Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Market Performance and Planning Forum. My name is Isabella Nicosia, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating the web conference today. I'm also joined on the line by a few of our presenters. We have Guillermo Bautista Alberte, Director of Market Analysis and Forecasting, Raul Kalascar, Manager of Market Validation and Analysis, Katie Wickler, Market Engineering Specialist for Market Analysis and Forecasting, and Keone Almeida, Manager of Stakeholder Affairs. Don Trethaway, Principal of Market Design Policy, John Gooden, Senior Manager of Regulatory Policy and Infrastructure, and Adrian Chiosi, Senior Manager of Strategic Initiative Management, will be joining us later on as well. And then we also have Jenny Sage from Market Validation and Analysis and Abhishek Sundwali from Market Analysis and Forecasting on the line as well to answer any questions. Today's presentation was posted to the User Groups and Recurring Meetings webpage of the California ISO website. Today's call is being recorded. The recording is for informational and convenience purposes only, and any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. The objective of today's Market Performance and Planning Forum is to really enable a dialogue on implementation planning and market performance issues. So this includes reviewing key market performance topics, sharing updates related to the 2021 release plans, providing information on specific initiatives to support market participants in budget and resource planning, and then also to focus on implementation planning. So that includes clarifying timelines, discussing external impacts, and then also covering some policy discussions that should occur in the initiative stakeholder process. The agenda for today, we're going to start off with a market performance update from Guillermo, Katie, Raul, and Amir. And then we will also go into some stakeholder process improvements from Keone. And then later on this morning, we'll have a policy update and release update from Don, John, and Adrian. So with that, I will hand it over to Guillermo, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Isabella. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for making the time for this call. We have quite an agenda for this morning discussion regarding the market performance update. Different people within the team of market analysis and forecasting will be presenting different topics. Can we move to the next slide, please? Just to give you a summary of the topics that we expect to cover today, we're going to start with the Category 1. We have implemented the Phase 1 and Phase 2 in the recent weeks. We are going to give you a preview of the summer conditions, and that is very targeted to one day that was the most critical day so far, and that is June 8th, 17. We have some typical trends about renewable and hydro production. We are going to have an update of congestion revenue rights. There was a question that we couldn't answer last time in the MPPF regarding the February conditions in which we had these extreme gas prices. The question was about what was the market cost or the additional cost for having such extreme prices. These updates provide that picture and a trend of how the cost over time, including the February month, is going to be discussed. Then we're going to go into a discussion of the battery's performance. As we know, batteries start to become quite an interesting pool of resources in the system, and we started tracking closely how they are performing. And there will be another topic about regulation downtrends. That is from previous discussions in the market update call. And there will be also a topic regarding one change we are doing to the ISO load forecasting outlook that is available on the website. Then the last topic would be the standard material that we have for the resource efficiency test. We have expanded that to cover not only the flexible ramping test, but also the capacity test, and that goes for not just the ISO area, but also to the other EAM area. And the last part is the standard deck that we have regarding market performance. Typically, we don't go through each one of those. These are the standard metrics that we just update for you to see how they are trending over time. If there are any specific questions, we can take those at the end. Now, given the many topics that we have for this morning, and given the fact that different people are going to be covering those. I really would appreciate that if there are any questions related to that specific topic, that you ask any of those at the time the topic is being discussed. At the end of the presentation, people may have already left the session, so it will be more efficient for us to be able to address any questions for any topic at the time the topic is being discussed. So with that, I would like to introduce Katie Wickler. She's a specialist, engineering specialist in the market analysis team, and she's going to start with the FERC 831 discussion. Katie?
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Guillermo. This is Katie Wickler, and I'll give a brief overview of the FERC Order 831 components that we've implemented in the recent months. So on March 20th, 2021, we implemented the first portion of the FERC Order 831 initiative, the compliance pieces of the initiative. So specifically, what we implemented on the 20th was raising the hard energy bid cap to $2,000 per megawatt hour. We also established, soft energy bid cap set at $1,000 per megawatt hour, and we additionally defined the minimum load cost hard cap at $2,000 per megawatt hour. In addition, we scaled the market penalty parameters up to reflect that $2,000 per megawatt hour hard cap as well. So the implications of this implementation were that the non-resource specific RA and non-RA imports, non-participating load, demand, exports, and virtual bids could bid up to the $2,000 hard cap essentially at any time. Resource-specific generating resources could bid above $1,000 by submitting a reference level change request. This is the functionality we implemented earlier in the year with the CCW initiative, basically our method of cost verification. In addition, with the March 20th implementation, the undersupply or the power balance constraint relaxation was set based on the $2,000 cap at all times. Next slide, please. On June 13th, about a week and a half ago, we implemented the second piece of the FERC 831 initiative, the market parameters and import bid verification components. So with this implementation, the bid cap is set at $1,000 most of the time, and the hard cap will raise to $2,000 under one of either of two conditions. The first condition being that we accept a cost-verified bid above $1,000 from a resource-specific resource, or our calculated maximum import bid price exceeds $1,000. So in those instances when the energy bid cap is raised to $2,000, non-resource-specific non-RA imports, non-participating load, demand, export, and virtual bids can be submitted up to $2,000. In addition, the non-resource-specific RA imports can submit bids to the higher of the highest cost-verified bid accepted or the maximum import bid price for that hour. Next slide, please. So additionally, along with this implementation, as we implemented in the March 20th phase, resource-specific resources can submit cost-verified bids above $1,000 at any time through the reference level change request process. Indeed, this is one of the components that raises the bid cap to $2,000. So any hours in the day ahead where the bid cap is set at $2,000 will carry over to the real time as well. And the real time may have some incremental hours where the cap is raised to $2,000 based on either the real time max import bid price calculation or our acceptance of any real time cost verified bids above $1,000. The last piece for this is that if any hour or more has the bid cap set at $2,000, the whole day will use penalty prices sort of scaled to that $2,000 cap. Next slide, please. And I will turn it over to Guillermo to cover some metrics about the bidding.
Thank you, Katie. This is just a very simplistic approach of how the implications of 831 and phase 1 and 2 are on the market that we currently have since March 20th. And this first one just gives you the total daily volume of bids that are above $1,000. And we start tracking obviously that since March 20th when they were allowed to above $1,000. And there are supposed to be two colors. One is the bidding volume. We do see bits above $1,000 coming in the day-ahead market. And by the way, this is on the day-ahead market. And the orange bar is for the clear volume. And you can see that there is basically no orange bars here because nothing was clear for those bits that were bidding in above $1,000. And there are some stable volumes of bits above $1,000 for most of the days. You can see in early June there was a spike of the volume of bits coming in above 1,000, and this is just the dynamics of the market. They are allowed to bid in above $1,000, and this is what we see. Now, if we move to the next slide, please. This gives you the type of resource that is bidding above $1,000, and effectively we have only convergent bids bidding in above the $1,000, and that could be intuitive to understand how they can be bidding above. And again, none of that has effectively cleared in the market. The prices have to reach in those levels to be able to clear successfully in the market. The next one, please, is going to give you some color as to in what range these bids are coming in to the market. And the range is actually all the way up to $2,000. It's relatively well distributed between $1,000 and $2,000. And that just gives you the preview of how this is working after we have implemented FAC 31 and phase 1 and phase 2. You may see that we cover basically through June 14, 15. By the time we have to put this material together, we have to have a cutoff day. And we will continue to report that. Naturally, we would expect to see more activity in the days of last week when we have higher load conditions. We know that the bid cap triggered to be above $1,000 in several hours in multiple days around the June 16, 17, given the prices. And that was mainly from the import side of the equation of the 831 because gas costs these days have not been extremely high to trigger the cost verification process, and we have not received such bids above that level. We will continue to report that as we progress into the summer. Let's pause here, Isabella, and see if we have any questions regarding this topic.
Okay, so to enter a question, you can do so by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad. Bobby, will you let us know if anyone enters the question queue?
Yes, we do have one caller right now.
Okay, go ahead.
Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, quick, it's Carolyn Carine for UF. Quick question for you on the graph. On page 12, where it has the vertical axis of megawatt hours. I was wondering, is this for like the peak hour? What's the is it? I doubt it's the cumulative day. Is it what period of time are you collecting these prices over?
Yeah, it's a daily metric, and it's a summation of all the megawatts associated with bits above 1,000. So if you have different bits to different hours of the day, we simply sum up all the bits from all hours for a day. And the granularity that you have here is daily. So it's just the simple summation of all the bits from all hours in the day.
Okay, so essentially there have been, on an hourly basis, very few.
Yeah, basically you take, the typical period of anywhere between April 10th to the 25th. I would say it's around 1,200, 1,300 megawatts. That will be the summation for all 24 hours for each day. So 1,300 megawatts divided by 24 will give you an average of how many megawatts are within above 1,000 for each hour of the day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Guillermo. This is Callie Wells with WPTF. Quick follow-up question on that. Do you have a sense of what the hourly profile is for these bids above 1,000 across the day? Do they tend to be kind of every hour or concentrated in a few?
I knew I would get this question. We'll just run out of time to put more variations of this, and this is a very good question. If you have the daily profile on an hourly basis, where are they accrued? I don't have it right now, but I'm sure we're going to put it in the upcoming version. But that's a good question.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
We have no more questions at this time.
Okay, let's move on to the next topic then, please. Summer conditions, and please keep in mind, we just have these high load, high temperature days late last week, and it's quite early to have a very comprehensive and conclusive analysis of how things play out, and it's, I would say, too early to have that type of complete analysis, and we don't even have the full month in play. So please take this with some caveat because it's only very targeted to some of the information that we have for the most critical day of last week, that was June 17. There will be future opportunities, potentially upcoming MPPF, where we can cover more comprehensively the summer conditions once we have more time accrued of how this is working. And we also have some summer readiness items still in the works to be implemented. And I think in the next round of the MPPF, we could have a very comprehensive analysis of how things are working out. But for now, and given the fact that there may be some questions how things are so far working, and we already have some mini tests based on last weekend conditions, we just want to give you some preview of how things are looking like. And that is the reason we have a few slides for this, and it's specifically related to the performance of June 17th. The first one is a very simple comparison. If we compare the monthly shows for RA system-wide level, June 2020 versus June 21, and we'll include the July because we already have July, how that looks like. And you can see for June, the RA levels are relatively higher than last June, and for July, they are quite comparable. And that just gives you a sense of how much additional RA we are getting in comparison to previous year. And granted, there are many reference points that we have to take into account. What is the load projected for 2020 versus 2021 and so on. But this is just a simplistic view of what is the RA that we have in place. If we go to the next slide, please. This is the same information broken out by technology, fuel type of resources. And you have the different technologies that we use. Gas, obviously, is the dominant component here. And you can see the variations across the different technologies for the month of June 2020 versus June 2021. And if you see the imports, for instance, the static value, you can see that they are quite comparable between the 2 years. And naturally, you are going to see that depending on the technology, you may have more or less. Next slide, please. Okay, now regarding the performance of June 17, how this is looking like. All this information is based on the day-ahead market information that we had. And obviously, you may have seen that we issued some heat bulletins, some notifications, flex alert, given on the projections that we have. And some of those have to take place before we go into the operating date. And as soon as, or even earlier than running the day-ahead market, we have to make these projections to ensure that we proactively communicate the conditions of the system. This plot is being reduced from the previous discussion that we have regarding the August event, and it has different components. In the first one, you have two dotted lines, one in green, one in blue, standing for the blue, the gross load, plus operating reserves. That is basically about the 6% of the load. And then when you subtract all the forecasted real capability, you have what we call the net load or the net load forecast. And that still includes the operating reserves. That just gives you the shape of gross versus net. And on an hourly basis, naturally, you can see that the net load peaks a bit after the gross peak, and that is the standard expectation. There are two lines. One line that is the black line, well above the others, and that is what we call the array nominations. That is effectively the same value that you see in the previous two slides that is related to the array showings. And typically it's going to be a flat value because it's based on the monthly values. The one in red that has some shaping according to the hour is what we call the most offer obligations. Once we have to run the day-ahead market, we need to account for some array that has to be most offer. If they don't bid in, we inserted a bid, and that portion in red just tells you, quantifies that portion of the most offer. Now, if we move into the description of the bars, there are about 4 different bars, and the colors may be not very different, but you can see the main component, the largest component, is reflected in the bars in yellow. And that is the portion that we call array energy. These bars are based on all the bids available in the day-ahead market for June 17. All what we do is take all the bids of physical resources. This doesn't include the convergence bids. We take all the physical resources supply bids, and we track that against which ones are array, at what level they are array. And we also track the portion that is being bidden in as capacity for operating reserves, either regulation up and spinning, non-spin. And we only break it down in these two components, whether it is array associated or whether it's above array. The portion in yellow is all the bids available in the day-ahead market that are associated with array. There is a corresponding portion that is gray, that is the capacity associated to array, but that capacity is bid in for ancillary services. The other two groups, the one in blue and greenish, is for energy that was available in the market that is above array or not associated with array. You may have a gas resource, for instance, that has a specific array level. Up to the array level, we counted in the yellow, that is the array energy. Above that is what we consider energy above array, and is accounted for the blue. And we also have the same capacity accounted for those bidding in for ancillary services. And the highlight here is obviously how the supply stack is positioned in the system for meeting the load forecast conditions for the next day. You can see a dominant effect here, and one is that if you compare the yellow line, and I would say plus the gray bar, all this together is the energy associated with array. We would expect that in concept we could cover all the demand plus operating reserves with the array energy and AS. And you can see that for most of the day that is the case, except for the most critical hours. That starts to go from hour ending 17 all the way through hour ending 22, basically. In this hours, you can see that the dotted lines, green and blue, are outside the range of the yellow portion, that is the array energy, indicating that the market, in order to meet that level of load, would have to rely also on energy that is not associated with array. And this is the same picture and discussion we elaborated back in the August conditions. And I think this is one of the conditions that you can see that may have triggered the conditions and the communication we had related to the Flex Alert to be better aware of how system conditions could play a role once we go into the real-time market. Naturally, things are bounded to change. We may have the forecast coming in differently. It's not surprising that in this very critical days where the weather is driving the load, there could be inherently volatility, variability, and obviously that is going to play a factor eventually how things come into the real-time market. Next slide, please. This is about the interties. There has been a lot of discussion about how interties are working in the CAISO market, and this gives you a breakdown of the different interties that we have in the system. And we have imports, exports, those that are static. We have the dynamic schedules, and we also have a component that is balanced between the import and the export that we call the wheels. And the line is the net among all those components, is the net interchange, basically. And that gives you the breakdown of how the interties play a role on June 17. You can see that we have relatively healthy volumes of imports in the range of almost 8,000 megawatts for the peak time. Concurrently, we have also quite a lot of exports on that day, peaking over 4,000 megawatts. And the wheels, the portion that is for the export and the import, they do not add capacity to the power balance of the CAISO. It's just a pass-through. And that just gives you a sense of how the interties were working for that day. Next slide, please. Now, the previous picture was based on the integrated forward market solution, the IFM. Once we go into the ROC process, the reliability unit commitment, there may be changes to the dispatches, and specific to interties, we know that the ROC schedules are the ones that are going to be used as a reference for tagging purposes and also for protection into the real-time market. This trend shows you the outcome of ROC, effectively what exports had to be reduced with respect to the IFM solution. And you can see that it was quite meaningful for the peak hours, all the way from our ending 16 through our ending 22. And the color code just tells you the nature of the type of exports that were curtailed in the ROC process. We don't have ETCs or TORs. They have very high priority given the fact that they are backed up by these existing rights. The ones that were reduced are starting from the lowest priority in the economic exports. There were some economical exports reduced in ROC, followed by quite a meaningful amount of low priority exports coming in IFM. These are basically price taker exports that were awarded in IFM. Once we go into the ROC, they have to be reduced. And there was a small portion of high priority exports curtailed in the ROC process. And you may recall in the discussion of the priorities that once we go into the ROC process, there are different priorities. Lowest priority is economic exports, followed by low priority or price taker exports, followed by high priority exports. The high priority exports are effectively at the same priority level as our own load. Once we have effectively exhausted all these lower priority exports, economic or low or price takers, the next step is effectively to start reducing our own load or reducing the high priority exports. And that is the reason that in those days you can see that our ending 19 through our ending 22, we were reducing high priority exports at the same time the ROC process was effectively infeasible. We have a power balance constraint relaxation in the ROC process indicating that we would then be able to meet the ROC requirement that we have. At that point, it's a matter of which one you cut in what proportion. There is no such a rule of what proportion should be. It's based on all the information that the system has. The starting point is that they are at the same level field. High priority has the same priority as the ROC and power balance constraint in our system under the current construct. And this is how we end up with this level of curtailment and the type of exports that were curtailed. Next slide, please. are the specific picture for wheels. And this is another topic of discussion in recent months. And we also have different types of wheels in our market. And we also have the association to the different priorities that we put. So here we just put every single potential priority that could be in there. And you can see that there are effectively three types of wheels specific to that day. There is the portion of TORs, also the portion of ETCs. These are backed by transmission rights. And the portion in yellow is the one that is the self-scheduled wheels coming through the market. I think we saw up to, you can see the map here, it's around slightly over 1,000 megawatts for the peak hour. I would say about 600 or so were sourcing from Malin going through the southwest. And these were self-scheduled, basically. And given the priority that we currently have defined under the current practice, once they are cleared in IFM, effectively, they were not reduced in the ROC process. And all what you see here, the IFM solution is effectively the same solution for the ROC process. Next slide, please. This is a simple comparison, and it gives you three references. The first one is the day-ahead forecast, that is the bright blue. That is the typical forecast that we generate and is going to be consumed for our application. This is the value that is posted on Oasis. Then you have the IFM schedule, effectively the physical supply scheduled by the integrated forward market. And that gives you a reference in comparison to the forecast, how short or how long the IFM solution was. Obviously, there will be a picture here of convergence bits, right? They can display the physical supply demand so that they can make it or fill in the gap. The last portion is the line in greenish that I would call the high confidence forecast, and that is an upper band that we estimate for every day in the day-ahead market. We generate the standard forecast based on the model that we have. In addition to that, we always estimate this confidence band, an upper and a lower band of if things are volatile, if things are changing dramatically from the day ahead to the real time, effectively how wild the deviation could happen from the standard forecast, and that is what we call the high confidence forecast. It's an upper band. And what you can see in the greenish line is effectively what was the upper confidence band forecast that we have for that day. So even though our peak forecast may be in the range of 43,300 megawatts for that day, we were estimating that given all the uncertainty that may realize based on historical trends, the forecast could eventually go as high as almost 40,000 megawatts. When we go into the ROC process, we have been effectively using the high confidence forecast. That is effectively the line in green. This is what the ROC process is going to be solving for, and is going to be driving the solution to meet. And in some cases, naturally, that high confidence forecast may not realize. In some cases, it has realized, and that is part of the nature of the business, right? You really don't know when it's going to play a big role, but you know that it's bound to happen. And that is the conservative approach we have taken to ensure that we are able to project for when conditions get really volatile and changing from the day-ahead market to the real time. Next slide, please. This is one of the areas that was with a lot of discussion in the previous months and has to do with the ISO balancing area subject to the capacity test. And we recently, just on time for the last week conditions, we implemented early in the week one of the components of the summer readiness, and that was the inclusion of the uncertainty requirements in the capacity test. we analyzed this day, and what you can find is that there were 3 intervals. Effectively, any bar that is negative is indicating a failure of the capacity test, and this is only for CAISO. We may also have information for all the other areas, but the point of interest here is for the CAISO. For CAISO, on June 17, for the peaking conditions around hour ending 19, interval 4, and hour ending 20, intervals 3 and 4, the CAISO balancing area failed the test, and the implications is that once we have a failure in the capacity test, the transfers into the real-time market are going to be bounded. In this specific day, even though we failed the test, the level of transfers that were materializing around this time of the day were naturally below the EIM transfer. So in that sense, the capacity test outcome of having these failures didn't materialize in an implication of limiting the transfers into the real-time market because they, again, were naturally below the transfer limits. And that's all what we have for just what happened recently, late last week. Again, this is just a preview given how close this is to what really happened just late last week. This is not a full comprehensive analysis. We naturally have to wait for a wider time frame to analyze how things are working and also have more time to be able to complete many more metrics. There will be naturally more opportunities later in the summer, naturally maybe the next NPPF, where we can provide a more holistic analysis of how things are working for this summer. With that, let me pause and see if we have any questions.
As a reminder, you can enter the question queue by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad.
We do have several callers in the queue. Going to the first caller. Caller, your line is unmuted.
Hi, Guillermo. This is Callie Wells with WPTF again. First of all, I want to say thank you guys for putting together these metrics on such short notice. I know it's tough to kind of throw all these together quickly, but again, appreciate you guys putting the effort out there so we can at least start some of this discussion. I have a couple questions back on slide 20 and then some on slide 18. Okay, we can start with this one. So I was curious if you can elaborate a little bit more on what conditions or how does the CAISO decide to use the high confidence forecast in REC versus the day ahead forecast?
Well, we by practice now use the high confidence band.
Okay, so just 20, always under all normal conditions, it's the high confidence band?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. And then I know you talked about how naturally you'll have virtual demands that can help make up the gap. Do you have a sense, because I know on this day I believe we were net virtual demand. Do you have a sense of how much of the gap between your ISM schedule and the high confidence was made up of the virtual demand positions?
We didn't have enough time to put more metrics, and Kelly, I think that is a good one to have for the subsequent discussion whenever that next round could be. At this point, we don't have all those metrics.
Okay, understandable. So that was all I had on this one, but back on slide 18, I just want to make sure I understand kind of what you were describing here. So when I'm looking at the hours, I think 19 to 22, when we had the high priority exports cut. So was REC, you mentioned that there was a power balance constraint violation in REC. So was REC cutting these high priority exports instead of reducing load, or what was the interchange there?
Yeah, I wouldn't say instead of, I would say concurrent with, because once we have exhausted the economic and the low priority exports, what follows next is both high priority PTK exports and our own load that is reflected through the power balance. They are exactly at the same priority. So if you need to go into that area, it's going to be up to the optimization, how it assigns and gives the share of how much is cutting export versus relaxing the constraint. For this house, it was reduction of PTK exports at the same time, we were being infeasible in the power balance constraint of rock. So it's not one or the other. They are at the same level and they are happening basically at the same time.
Okay, so it was actually both of those were occurring at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that. And so then in terms of the pricing implications in the RUC prices, we should have seen the net power balance constraint penalty parameter impacting the prices?
Yeah, and I think the rock prices, depending what price you may be looking at, if you look at generally the energy component, that energy component should be, for those houses where we have instability, basically hitting the 250 or even higher, depending on the boundary condition that we have.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Guillermo. This is Brian Baker with Middle River Power. May I ask you to go to slide 16, please? You described this in such an even tone of voice that I kind of didn't quite grasp the implications of this until you were almost past it. But I just want to confirm that this slide pretty clearly, at least as I believe, shows that the ISO, that the RA requirements were insufficient on most of the net load peak hours on this day to cover the ISO's needs. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, with the caveat that this is based on the day-ahead forecast. And now we know that when we went into the real time, the actual load came in the range of 41,080 megawatts or so. Just looking from the day-ahead perspective alone, that's correct. I think part of the subsequent analysis had to do how that transpired into the real time, right? Because generation may be different because you may have outages, but the load in this specific day came lower than the forecast. So there are two moving pieces here that we have to internalize in the real-time analysis.
Okay, understood. So just to confirm, the forecasts shown on this slide, excuse me, are day-ahead forecasts, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And the supply stack, just a clarification, the forecast, yes, is the day ahead, but also the bid stack, the supply available is also from the day ahead.
Okay, understood. The question obviously comes is were there a lot of outages this day? Why were the RA requirements insufficient? Was the forecast too low, or did the ISO have a number of outages? Can you shed any light on that?
I think it's going to be a bit premature because obviously we haven't had all the time to analyze at length this day, Brian. So I would hold a little bit on this so that we can have more time and opportunity to review all the salient features that we know that we have to look. This is as much as we could put together for today, but it's not all what we should be looking at.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks, Guillermo. Let me echo Callie's appreciation for putting this data together as quickly as you did. It's pretty stunning, and I understand that there's a lot of moving pieces, but thank you for putting this together and talking it through.
Thank you.
Guillermo, I am seeing one question in the chat. It's a follow-up on Callie's question. Will we be publishing the high confidence forecast as well as the expected value forecast?
Oh, that's a good question, because what we have is the information flowing through is just the normal forecast, the 50-50 forecast. I don't think we have the data flow to be able to put that confidence band right now. I would have to check that. I think the only piece that we post right now on Oasis is the standard forecast.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions in the verbal queue?
Yes, we do have a couple callers in queue. Going to the first caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Guillermo. This is Salmia Safri with PG&E, and I apologize if these are basic questions. It's back on slide 20. that you've received a couple of questions. So I want to make sure I understand this. The gray line, if I understand, is the sum of all of the load bids and virtual demand bids that you got in the IFM. Is that correct?
It doesn't include the virtual. It's basically only physical supply. The idea is when we go into the ROC process, we want to see in retrospective what physical supply the IFM schedule gave back.
Oh, okay. All right.
And then you can compare. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay. And then the blue, so now what we consider the CAISO forecast of CAISO demand is now always going to be this high confidence line, the green line.
That is the current practice that we have, that we are using the high confidence band to secure for these volatile conditions. Yes.
Okay. So based on the conversation with Callie, that's going to be, is that the practice going forward indefinitely, or is that something where the CAISO is going to possibly flip back and forth?
Yeah, well, I cannot guarantee you that eventually there may be some variation, some adjustment that we have to do. I think naturally once we start going to a discussion of the head market enhancements, all this may be a modern discussion because we are going to have a different construct. I would say that may be the natural opportunity for when this is going to be revised. Based on conditions, based on operations, there is still the possibility that we may have to revise the practice in the meantime. But as of now, this is what we have.
Okay, thanks. And so then in RUC, you were trying to meet the green line. So if I look at this, you basically would have had to, in the peak hours, dispatch everything, and you would still have been substantially short to meet your green by like 5,000 megawatts. Is that what this is saying?
Sorry, I got distracted. I couldn't get your question. Would you mind to repeat the question?
In RUC, you dispatch, so you got your IFM awards, and then you look in RUC, my understanding is to see if you need any additional, you strip out the virtuals, and you see if you need to have any additional RUC awards to meet the CAISO forecast of CAISO demand.
Yes, correct. Typically, the logic is that we have, well, not typically, this is what always happens. Once we have the IFM solution, that is effectively kind of a starting point for RAC, and then you displace or you discount the convergence bit. You may replace the bidding from renewable resources by the forecast, and that gives you variations, delta, right? Now you have to clear against the CAISO demand forecast, plus minus these variations induced by the discounting of the virtuals and the adjustments of the VRs, plus now the adder for the upper confidence. So you start from IFM, but then you end up with this ROC solution that accounts for these inherent deltas that are going to arise, plus the additional forecast that we have.
Okay. Thank you. I think this is great. So what I'm understanding is that in RUC you were trying to get about 5,000 megawatts additionally to meet your green line, and if you use the blue line, it would have been about 2,000 megawatts.
Yeah.
Above the day ahead. Okay. Thank you very much for that explanation.
You're welcome.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hey, guys. It's David Francis at DTE Energy Trading. A couple questions. One, the last discussion on the high confidence forecast would be really useful for market participants to be able to have that set of values if that's what the ISO is relying on to run the market in its entirety. It's just having the IFM. So the old school day-ahead forecast doesn't do us any good if there's that much delta between the two. So I would encourage you to make those values public going forward, and historical values as well. On slide 18, if I may, the high priority exports, I just want to make sure I understand if any of those were curtailed, but were also backed by non-RA generation. Did that happen?
Yeah, and that's a very good question, Dave. Let me expand because I think there is more story to be told here. So the description I just gave is confined to what happened in the day-ahead market. Now, these high-priority exports are supported by non-RA resources. When this outcome is achieved in the day-ahead market, the consequence is going to be that these high-priority exports are going to be reduced. When the scaling coordinator has to go and start the process to move into the real time, the tagging is going to have to be based on the ROC solution that accounts for this reduction. Now, given the fact that they are high-priority exports, naturally, and we have seen that with those entities that experience this event, they come into the real time. They still have the high priority. They can come into the real time, repeat basically with the high priority, and they are going to be reassessed in the real time. And the real time may give you a different picture, a different outcome to what we have because now it's run based on the real-time conditions, like what actually happened on that day. When we go into the real time, the loads came about 16, 18 megawatts lower than expected, and naturally there was no need to do those curtailments into the real time. So effectively, these high priority exports flew through on that day.
All right. So my concern is it fair to conclude then that non-RA generation is unable to simply be a transmission customer of the CAISO and affect an export? So if you're cutting non-RA backed exports, essentially curtailing them the day ahead by not giving them a RUC award, you're giving something potentially unbid even, so certainly uncleared and potentially unbid, a higher priority, and I find that that's problematic, that generator-backed resource should be able to be a transmission customer and affect that export. So I'll continue to read up, but that's my concern. That I understand that they maintain the priority in the real time, but I'm concerned that they've designated themselves to be apart from CAISO load, and yet they're still being, for lack of a better phrase, taken from that purpose to be used to serve CAISO load.
Okay. Thank you for the comments, David.
Thanks, Seth.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Guillermo. Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions. Your last back and forth with Dave from DTE just answered a couple questions around kind of the flow of those priority price takers from day ahead into real time. But in future presentations, I think it would still be great to see sort of how those then performed in real time and if there were any impacts to those contracts being able to be used. Also want to just echo Brian and Callie's points on appreciating this data being put forward. I would like to ask, though, that if possible, whether in the sort of the changing the timing for the next MPPF meeting or just having a specific deep dive meeting on more of this data as you have time to process it, if that's doable sort of in the July timeframe so that we aren't kind of waiting until mid to late August when we're getting into the hopefully what won't have as tight of conditions until then, but not having to wait until then to be able to kind of review how the market performed over this kind of first test period of the summer. So just a request if there is opportunity to have either a quicker MPPF turnaround or just a standalone meeting to go over market performance from this past week. But then the question that I had was on the slide 16. Is the blue line the gross forecast plus operating reserves? Does that then reflect the high confidence forecast, or is that the day ahead market forecast plus operating reserves?
This is just the standard day-ahead market forecast plus operating reserves. And operating reserves is specifically a spin and non-spin. It doesn't include regulation.
Okay. And then looking at the high confidence forecast on slide 20, is that taking into account or does that sort of take the place of load bias in RUC? Or is there potential to have additional bias above that high confidence forecast to account for any potential needed additional imbalance reserves or something along those lines?
Yeah, I think the feature, the capability for the operator to further adjust that forecast exists. I will have to have data to support my answer whether it has been done or not. I think naturally once we have moved into using the high confidence, that inherently takes into account the main concerns from an operational point of view because you are trying to hedge against this volatility. So my impression would be that would highly reduce or fully reduce the need for having ad hoc adjustments, but the possibility still exists.
Okay. Great. Thank you for explaining that, and look forward to having additional information when your team has more time to process through everything. But again, really appreciate the effort that went into doing this review on short notice.
Yeah, and just great expectation. I think we just covered one day that was the interesting date last week. Keep in mind, we are coming to a second wave late this week, so by the time we want to start analyzing this day, we may have more days to put together. And that is one of the challenges that we explained at the beginning. We really would like to have a more extended time frame to see more holistically over time how things are working. And one day is useful and give you a lot of insights. We would also like to look at this in a wider time frame.
Great, thank you.
How many more questions do we have in the queue?
We have no more questions in the verbal queue.
Okay, great. Thanks, Guillermo.
Okay, let's move on to the next section. Very quickly, I think, next slide, please. You know that we have these extreme weather conditions that we were just experiencing last week, but in general, we have a very dry season, and that naturally is going to be reflected on the renewable and hydro production. This first one is a trend, just a cumulative trend of the curtailment we have had. And typical for the year, in the shoulder months of March through May, to see a higher volume of renewable curtailment given the oversupply conditions that we experienced during this time, and given the fact that we have relatively low levels of load and high penetration of renewable resources. And that is not surprising. If we move to the next slide, I think you are going to start to see the trend now of mainly the hydro. You can compare the total hydro production of 2019 versus 2020 and now going into 2021. And you can see hydro is quite low in comparison to historical, and this is just looking at the last 2 years. But that gives you a sense that hydro production is much less than previous years. And the interesting part, when you compare the total bars that accounts for the production of wind and solar, you can see that we are still making some of that through the solar and through the wind production. That is just the item to highlight here. Let me move into the next topic. Next slide, please. This is just a typical update. There are no big news on this area, just to give you the current performance. And this is just the total settlements that we have for CRRs, how they are trending. Typically, we expect to see higher numbers in the summer season, anywhere between June through potentially September. It comes down through the winter and spring and starts to pick up by the time we reach the May season. And this has to do a lot with the level of congestion that we can experience in the system. Nothing surprising here. Next slide, please. This is the effect of the pro rata funding, and you can see a comparison between having pro rata funding, the current practice, versus no pro rata funding that was the previous policy before we have implemented the CRR1B changes. And effectively that means that the total balance, that is the allocation of money excess goes to measure demand, that continues to accrue. We don't include a specific number here, but you can see that month after month, that effectively results in a surplus allocation to measure demand. And that is the expected outcome given how the pro rata funding is designed. Next slide. And this is the one that tracks what we have called the CRR auction efficiency, and that is the comparison of how much is paid to get CRRs through the auction versus how much those same CRRs are paid out. And ideally, we like to see the two bars, the red and the blue, tracking closely together with some variation given all the risk premium inherent to the CRR. You can see that in the months of, I would say, November, December, January, the percentage, the ratio between what is paid versus what is charged, it was pretty good in the range of 80 plus, even over 100%. In the last 2 months, as we start getting into more and more congestion, that ratio has reduced from 73 or so to almost 50%, indicating that for every dollar that we pay to auction CRRs, 50 cents were accrued when selling that CRR in the auction. And this obviously has to do a lot with the dynamics of the congestion market, and it's going to be a moving target month to month. We would like to continue to track the trends of this over time. I think that's what I have for this component of CRRs. Let's pause and see if we have any questions for these last two topics.
While we're waiting for people to enter the queue, I do have a clarification question in the chat. Is the CAISO definition of local curtailment when the SMEC is positive but the congestion component is negative?
Local curtailment is actually when the MCC, the marginal congestion component, is negative, because we're indicating that the price signal is negative to indicate that the resource has to be DEC. And yes, that is the logic that we utilize. And it's not completely accurate in some cases, because in some cases you may have a combination of congestion plus supply or oversupply conditions playing at the same time. And you may have other cases where some positive congestion is offset with some negative congestion, and the net effect is still negative or positive. So there are some considerations that we have to caveat, but that is a logic that we have implemented and how we track what is local versus system.
Okay. And I'm seeing another question in the queue. Can you please remind me of when you started using this in RUC, or is this the adjusted CAISO forecast of CAISO demand that is referenced in the BPMs, and that's going back to the high confidence forecast topic?
Yes, I don't have a date. I think I have a homework to get back to you. I think we can provide that in a subsequent opportunity. I don't have a date right now.
Okay, thanks, Guillermo. And then last question in the chat, could we address the high confidence forecast in more detail, specifically how it's validated in the next PPF?
Yeah, I think that's a good item for consideration. Thank you.
Okay. And it looks like we have no one in the verbal queue, so I'll move
on. Okay. Very quickly, I think I just want to highlight this item. Can we move to the next slide, please? In the last MPPF, we discussed in detail the conditions that arose in mid-February when we had this cold weather coming all the way from the east and impacted to some extent the gas conditions in the west. We cover different areas, how the prices work out, how the economic costs work. The only piece that we couldn't elaborate was the cost implications of having this condition for the CAISO market. We are coming back and just to give you that update, and obviously what we call the cost is really what we settle through the CAISO market that includes many of the different components, the settlements of energy for the day ahead, the incremental in the real time, the ancillary services cost, the Bitcoin recovery, including the GMC. If we go to the next slide, that is going to give you a trend of the cost that we have for almost 3 years. And the bars in blue is the total cost, that is a dollar value, and you can see it can go as high as $2 billion that we experienced in 2018 or close to that same value in August 2020. If we take a reference of how much demand we have to meet based on the prices that we have in the market, effectively we take an average of the cost by the total energy sector. And that gives you the trend in orange. That is that is effectively an average of demand. You can see the cost associated to each month in comparison to the average demand that we have to meet in that month. And here comes February. You can see that February was relatively higher than January and March, the neighboring months, because of the gas condition that we have. You can take a ballpark approximation. The cost for a month in January or March was around $570 million per month. For February, it exceeded $1 billion, and that was mainly accrued in the middays of February 14 through 17, 18. Next slide, please. This one is the average cost, effectively all the total cost divided by the energy that we have to settle. And that is going to be a cost of dollars per megawatt. And you can see as early as February, we have a cost in the range of $75. You pick that as a comparison against the average cost of August, that was about $87. Or back in 2018, about $84, $85. That just gives you a perspective of how meaningful the gas and dynamics play a role in the energy cost of the electric sector that is run by the California ISO. With that, I think we can move to the next station, Isabella. And from here on, there will be other members of my team going through the different metrics. I would like just to have one last opportunity to address any of the previous topics before we move on.
As a reminder, #2 will enter you into the question queue.
We do have one caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hey, Guillermo, it's Callie Wells again with WPTF. Again, apologize to go back to that high confidence forecast topic, but your response to the last question made me think that it's not just the CAISO adjusted or the adjustment of the CAISO forecast of CAISO demand. And so if this is a new forecast that's being used in RUC, do you guys plan on updating the BPMs?
We will follow through, okay, to make sure that this transparent what the practice is.
Okay, but is that an accurate description that this high confidence forecast is not the same as the adjusted CAISO forecast of CAISO demand that's in the current BPM?
It is. I think we may be getting confused now with the mechanics, right? And how you arrive to the number that has to be adjusted. Effectively, what we're using is the adjusted forecast. How you arrive to that number, whether it is by operator judgment versus having a more sophisticated logic of the high confidence band, that is really the originator, how you come with what the adjustment should be.
Okay, that is extremely helpful. So it's instead of an operator adjustment, it's a calculation done, and essentially you're using the calculation now.
Yeah.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, the clarification of the BPM would be extremely helpful.
Point taken.
We have no more callers in the queue at this time.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
We can move to the next topic. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jen.
Go ahead. Hi, this is Jenny Sage with the Market Validation and Analysis Group. We received some inquiries asking about whether day-ahead or write-down prices have been increasing over time and what are the drivers of this. So we put together an analysis going back to the beginning of 2019. So first to level set, operating reserves like spin and non-spin are set by the maximum of a formula that's the maximum of either a percentage of our load forecast, our low single severe contingency, or a percentage of our forecasted solar production. So, but regulation requirements we have over the past few years decided to set based on system-wide renewable megawatt variability because regulation up and down help us manage the wind and solar penetration that we've had over the years. So as the amount of wind and solar on the grid increase, there is more variability that we need to manage, and we have been increasing the regulation requirements. And so what this trend shows is that between 2019 and 2020, the hourly increase in ISM write-down procurement has increased by an average of 94 megawatts per hour. However, the average hourly price has gone down from $10.11 in 2019 to $9.47 in 2020. However, if we go to the next slide, you can see there is seasonal variability. And we got this question, particularly we wanted to focus on quarter 4 and quarter 1 of the year. And you can see that we do experience a drop in prices in quarter 3, and then in quarter 1 and quarter 4 the requirements increase, and along with that is an increase in prices. And so what we've typically seen here is we have more wind and solar variability, cloud cover to manage, and we need an increase in requirements to manage this. And also driving the write-down price is the availability of bids and hydro that we have to provide the regulation services. So you do experience some volatility in quarter 4 and quarter 1, and certainly in the last quarter 1 and quarter 4, the requirements are the highest we've seen in the past 2 years, and the prices are a bit higher, but on average not as high as they were in 2019. Are there any questions on these trends? Do you have any questions in the queue?
We have no questions in the queue at this moment.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Let me move on to the next set of topics. And can someone confirm you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. So these next set of trends are providing more details about the storage resource. And I wanted to take a step back and give a brief introduction on this topic, and then I will go into the slides. So we have started seeing a lot of development in introduction of storage resources in the ISO market. And storage has been the most talked about topic in our policy discussions. So what we have seen in the last 12 months is a gradual increase in the number of resources that are participating in the ISO market. And we have also seen that a lot of storage resources have been planning to come online before the summer of 2021. So in the next set of slides, we will provide some metrics that give the participants insights as to what has been happening on the CAISO grid. With that background, let me jump into this specific slide. So in the ISO market, the storage resources can participate in various different shapes and forms. The most common element of the CAISO market design enabled the storage resources historically to participate either to provide regulation only or to provide energy plus ancillary service. And when I say ancillary service, that means storage can provide spin, regulation up, and regulation down. So broadly speaking, there were only two categories. Regulation only, which is also known commonly as REM, and the second is energy plus ancillary service. There are two other new types of avenue that storage can participate in the ISO market. That would be to the co-located resource and the hybrid resource. Those specific type of resources are not explicitly, captured in this slide, or they haven't been carved out of the specific definition. So for now, for this slide and the next set of slides, we are only focusing on the historical or, pre-hybrid and co-located storage resources. With that, if you look at this slide, this is showing you the count or the number of storage resources in the ISO market for last 12 months. And you can see that since last summer, we have essentially doubled the number of storage resources. Last year, we had around 12 total storage resources, and this May entering into June, we have 24, and even adding few more in June. And the key trend you can see here is very few resources are participating as regulation only, and most of the resources have chosen to participate for energy plus AS. And we believe that may be a trend that's continuing in future also. Can we go to the next slide? This is a slide that really complements the previous slide. The previous slide was only showing the number of resources, but as everyone knows, some of the characteristics of the storage resource is a storage resource has a state of charge, and a typical storage resources generally have a maximum state of charge, and they're either 2 or 4 hour batteries. And what that basically means is if you take the total state of charge and were to consume every megawatt hours of charge from that, it would take 4 hours to withdraw all the charge from that resource. Here in this plot, we are showing you the state of charge, the maximum state of charge for all the batteries by month. And some of the aspects to keep in mind when looking at this trend is we are only focusing on those resources that are actively participating in the market. So the obvious question would be, how is it possible that the maximum state of charge reduced in January compared to December? And that could be possible that there was a resource that was participating in December, did not submit bids in January, or there was a resource that was participating in December but did not participate all the way until April. So what we are showing here is only those active resources receiving market awards. And the key thing to realize is last summer we were somewhere around 500 megawatt hours. And this summer we are going to around 3,500. So it's not only double, but this is almost 4 to 5 times the capacity that we have for this summer compared to last summer. Furthermore, we are also seeing that all the newer resources, they are all choosing to provide energy plus ancillary service, and the regulation only is a very small amount. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. So the first two charts were showing number of storage resources, and were showing the total maximum stored energy from storage for the ISO systems. These set of charts are showing the hourly distribution of the total state of charge that is available on the ISO systems. And we have picked only last 3 months, and that's March, April, and May. And the key reason for picking only these months is to essentially highlight that we are seeing a sharp increase in May. And the second aspect of these charts is our expectation is most of the solar resources would charge in the spring months, which May was a typical spring month, would charge during the afternoon when the prices are cheap during high solar times. And they would discharge around the evening peak, around the net load peak when sun is going down and demand still stays high. Here, this chart is showing you the charge megawatt hours. And you can see in the month of May, between hour ending 13 and say 17 or 18, the maximum stored charge on the system for certain hours reach all the way up to 2,200 megawatt hours. Whereas if you look in March, the maximum number is way below 1,000 megawatts. So, we are seeing more and more participation from storage resource. Can we go to the next slide? This is a similar chart from the previous one. The previous chart was showing the state of charge based on the IFM awards. This chart is showing what do we actually see in terms of the maximum state of charge on the system. And the slight difference, or the difference that we would expect in real time compared to day ahead, would be, real time trend should at least match close to what is IFM, but the max state of charge may be higher or lower depending on what other function the storage resource is performing. In other words, it's possible that the storage resource that's going to provide energy in the evening is also providing regulation services in the afternoon, and it's possible that part of their state of charge may be used on regulation, and when it's providing regulation, its state of charge may be consumed there, and that's why you may see the trend slightly different in real time than in day ahead. And you can see here again in real time, May has significantly higher state of charge compared to March and April, and the increase is attributed to new sets of resources that we have seen come online starting in May timeframe. Can we go to the next slide? Here we are seeing a box bar plot for how much the resources are providing ancillary service. And the box bar plot is essentially showing the ratio of the total regulation up provided by storage resource compared to the total requirement in the system. And as we see the number of storage resources increase in our system, we are also seeing that most of the resource is choosing to provide regulation. And as you can see, around April and May, in some hours, the storage resources are almost providing close to 100% of the regulation up requirement. And you can see that the average regulation up provided by storage resource is approaching 50% in both April and May. Can we go to the next slide? Isabella, can we go to next slide?
It should be on slide 42 now. Can you see it?
Maybe my machine is stuck. Do you see regulation up or regulation down? Okay.
No.
Sorry, yeah. Now it was my machine that was slow to catch up. Thank you.
Okay.
So this is the last slide on the storage topic, and similar to the previous slide, here we can see the percentage or the ratio of total regulation down provided by the storage resource compared to the total requirement. And when we compare regulation up versus regulation down, we can see that the average regulation down that's being provided from storage resources is only approaching 25%. And one of the reasons that regulation down ratio is lower than the regulation up is because ISO markets tend to have a much higher regulation down requirement than the regulation up requirement. So, just a key point to make here is it's not that the storage resources are choosing only to provide regulation up and not regulation down, but the key takeaway here is, the regulation down requirement is much higher than regulation up requirement. That's why the ratio for the total regulation down provided by storage resource is only 25%. Based on our experience, we are seeing that the storage resources are making available both regulation up and regulation down equally in the ISO systems. Let me pause here and see if there are any questions on these MPPF slides.
Again, pressing #2 will enter you into the queue.
We do have one caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. This is Elvis Svoboda at PG&E. These are very interesting slides. One thing I was curious about is in procuring regulation so there's a good possibility here that you could see all of the regulation requirements being provided by only one or two large batteries. Is CAISO considering any kind of diversity requirements in terms of how it's procuring regulation in the future? Because the failure of one battery could obviously result in you're having essentially insufficient regulation for some period. Just curious whether you're thinking about that.
I think that's a very, very good comment, Alva. We internally have a strong focus on storage resources and have regular discussion about storage topics. And our operations team has brought various discussions to our technical forum on storage. So far, this specific comment has not been discussed, but I'm sure it's coming up on our radar. So we will take it back internally to discuss, if that's of a concern from operations perspective, and if it does, then we will try to figure out if that's something that needs to be discussed in the upcoming policy discussion. I know there is a storage discussion coming up soon. We can figure out, where we can discuss this specific question.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Rahul. It's Callie Wells with WPTF. I have a quick question. Do you guys have a sense of how much of the regulation capacity being provided by storage is actually being deployed off of the AGC signal? So trying to get a sense of, you mentioned, that their real-time state of charge might differ from day ahead because they're actually being called for that regulation. So I'm trying to get a sense of what the magnitude of that difference might be.
So I think this is a very good question, and we are looking at different angle of the same question. So let me rephrase your question and see if I've accurately captured that, and then I can try to provide you some response. So your question is, let's say if a resource has 50 megawatts of regulation up award, and it has a 50 megawatt of regulation up award for an entire hour, are we consuming 50 megawatt hours of SOC from that resource, or how much of SOC is being depleted from that? Am I accurately capturing your question?
Yes, you are.
So that is something that we really don't have a metric on hand, but I think if you recall, we have had other constraints that we have introduced in our market to ensure that there is enough SOC to support that regulation award. So in the sense that when a resource SOC is hitting those constraints, market will ensure, we are recouping those charge whenever that's being used for regulation. So to give you a short answer, yes, that is something of a concern for us, and we have those constraints in the market right now. Now, how much of that is being consumed, that's a trend we have not yet published publicly, but that's something that we have been discussing internally.
Okay, I appreciate that. Yeah, and if either through MPPF or maybe a natural fit will be in the energy storage enhancements policy to kind of see what those metrics are and maybe how frequently that new constraint in the market that you guys just implemented, or I guess soon to be implemented, is actually binding and causing, storage resources to either charge or discharge to continue to provide that regulation, I think would be really useful.
Thank you.
We have no more callers in the queue at this time.
Okay, let's move on to the next topic, and I think Amir is going to address that, or Amber, I'll hand it over.
So it'll be me. I am Amir Jalbach. I work under the short-term forecasting team here to present regarding battery changes and modifications to the TISO load forecasting per se. So we all know that there's been a large increase in battery resources connected to the ISO grid. Currently, we're at about 2,000 megawatts between the three TAC areas. And currently, battery charging is actually present in the load values that is feeding our automated load forecasting system, which we'll call from now on ALPS. So when we get these batteries that are charging, it looks like conventional consumption, whether you have an industrial plant or commercial HVAC units. It gives a different characteristic of the load that we're seeing because of all these megawatts of batteries coming on for charging purposes. So the best approach is these should be similar to dispatchable pumps, which are not currently in our forecast. So I think the best example is Helms. We do not forecast for Helms. Helms does not come into our ALPS system. We let the market handle it. And that's what we should be doing with these batteries as well. For charging and discharging should be done within the market, especially for charging purposes. We're going to remove them from our values that are feeding our system, because what you typically would see, and it's very evident during heat waves, when they are charging, it will impact our forecast. So if batteries come on, the load model will perceive that this is some sort of conventional consumption, and it will change, and then it will have a higher forecast, assuming that this new consumption will stay on. And in essence, our forecasting system will be producing a forecast that includes these batteries, but it should be absent of it. And so we will be making the changes within this month to reflect this. And when we do make the changes, you will see a change into the demand forecast and actuals on today's outlook to remove these charging batteries as they're coming on. So in essence, you will see a smoother graph. It will be absent. So I think there will be some information on today's outlook that contains these changes as well. So you have some informational views as well to kind of display the message of what the changes that we are doing. And I can show you the impact to today's outlook, because I know that gets a lot of high visibility in the next slide. So in here, I think June 4th. June 4th was a great date to display when I created this. I think last week would have been even better with all the battery and the heat waves kind of really would have indicatively shown what we had seen. So the gray is the current demand. So if you look at June 4th, you would see a line that looks exactly like this. It has a little uptick around 7 o'clock in the morning, and then kind of slowly ramps off with the battery charging. So what we are proposing is the new demand, the blue line, which would be decreasing in all instances. You'll see an increase because we're actually subtracting consumption, so we're going to get a lower line. It will be smoother, and it will line up with our forecast as well. So you shouldn't see any impact in regards to that, but you will see that there may be slightly different behavior in the load actual, especially during the heat events. And with that, are there any questions regarding this?
Looks like we have about 3 callers in the queue.
Going to the first caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you. This is Elvis Svoboda at PG&E. I was just curious on the, and I may be out of date on this, but in the past, I seem to recall that there was a difference between how these loads, in particular, not so much the Helms load, but the other pumping loads in the state were incorporated into forecasting the day ahead versus real time. And I'm wondering if there will be something of that sort, that issue in terms of how charging is either forecast or reported in the load resource balance reports. Do you have plans to break it out in some way so that we can distinguish between load and battery charging in the load resource balance reports?
This is Amber. Yeah, I mean, we can, although I think that that's a good question. From the forecasting side, we're not as familiar with the load balance reports, but let us take that one back. Isabella, if you could capture that, and we can take that back and get back to you on.
Thanks much.
Okay, thanks.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Mike Kramick from Boston Energy. I just got a general question. So I can understand the load forecast and how taking the megawatts out of the forecast will reduce the load forecast. But I'm curious, what impact did this have in the actual market solution? Is there a double counting of load somewhere, or is this more of just like a presentation issue and not a market optimization issue? I'm trying to understand the implications of this when you're solving your day ahead and real-time markets.
Maybe I can.
Yeah, Rahul, go ahead.
I can fill in just one gap, and then I think, Amber, you will have more insights. So, Michael, the question that you were asking about, how does it impact the market from the day-ahead market perspective? As you know, we are not using forecast in the integrated forward market. We are using bid-in demand for IFM and for RUC and for the the real-time market, we do have the forecast that feeds in. So yeah, I'll wait for Amber's response and then see if there are any follow-up from there.
Yeah, one of the things. Yeah, thanks, Rahul. On the market side, on the forecasting side, right, when you have an actual feeding into the load forecast system, and before we saw not as many battery resources on the system, it was not often that they were all charging at the same time. But as the battery growth is moving, and you see that moving, then we have to account for it because the load forecast will feed that actual into it. And not right away. It has a lag associated with it of 15 to 30 minutes, and Amir can definitely expand on that. It will react to it. So if that battery remains charging for an hour or 2 hours, then the load forecast will move up to account for the charging behavior that it's seeing and the actual tag that it has. That is a real-time forecast impact. But it is important that we remove those, just like we did with the dispatchable pumps, which is why this change is going to be there, so that you don't have the load forecast reacting to the charging behavior in real time, as well as charging in the market optimization.
Thanks. So in essence, what you're saying is this process could be overestimating the real-time load and potentially over-procuring because of this, I'll call it like a double counting of these megawatts.
There is the potential for that, right? But one of the things that we saw is that, when the battery growth was smaller, it wasn't as prevalent, but it's important that we make those changes now that the battery growth is there to align with what we do with the market dispatchable pump, which is why those changes will go in this month.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. When you had, 100 megawatts or whatever, it didn't matter. But now that we're talking 1,400, 1,500 megawatts, it definitely makes a difference now. So thank you.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Carolyn Carine, EMS for Energy Users Forum again. I have a couple of questions on this presentation, and then due to my own operator error, I didn't get in on the queue, so I have a few on slides 41 through 45. 44, whatever. Yeah, going back a few slides to the prior presenter. But on as far as page 45 goes, the proposal that you're making as far as removing, going from what's current, the gray line to the blue line, that data that's there, is there a way of preserving that data? So I realize you don't want to complicate the graph in today's Outlook, but maybe in one of the graphs below, showing this charging behavior, discretely, so that you can see when the batteries are charging. That's my first question. That's my harder of the two questions on this slide.
Yeah, for battery behavior, I think you can go to the supply section of today's Outlook, and you should be able to see when system-wide it's charging and discharging. That should still be available on the supply section.
So the supply section does show the charging.
Yes.
I haven't looked in a while, so I wasn't sure if it showed because I'm interested in gross. I realize you probably don't have batteries charging and discharging at the same time, so there isn't a gross versus, probably isn't much of a gross versus net issue.
Yeah, so you'll see total discharge and total charging on the system when you can view it on the supply side. And you don't think there's much of a net versus gross issue? Meaning, ignore.
And then the second one is, and I think toward the end my question might have been answered, but the charging of the storage, does it tend to be bid in demand, or is it tend to show up in real time because it's based on when the batteries are discharged? Or is it planned that the batteries are going to be discharged and the operators bid in some charging, assumed charging behavior?
Is the question how do storage resource participate in the day ahead in real time, or is the question about when do they receive a charge and discharge?
Yes, yeah. This the charging that you show there, is it bid? Is it tend to show up? Do you tend to know about it in the day ahead, or does it just tend to show up in real time?
Most of the storage users are participating in both day ahead and real time. So we have a pretty good idea about that in the day ahead itself.
Do you have an idea like how much of the charging how much of it is submitted in the day ahead versus how much shows up in real time? So is it like 75-25, 90-10, 50-50? Do you have any idea roughly?
We do not have that metric offhand, but if you just go back and look at some of the charts in this, you will see that day ahead and real time roughly tends to be pretty close on the system. It's possible that maybe resource swap, but on the system it tends to be pretty close.
In the past, yeah, now it might not get lost in the rounding. Historically, when batteries were, I remember when I used to look at the chart because, there was under 100 megawatts of batteries. So now, back then it would have got lost in the rounding. Going back to one of your earlier charts that showed when, how they came online, I can get an idea of maybe when they stopped getting lost in the rounding. I was just wondering, maybe if you could, in a future report, I realize you've got a lot of stuff that keeps getting added, but it'd be interesting to know how much of the charging is done is scheduled day ahead and how much shows up in real time, especially as they grow. And then if it's okay, let's see, going back that far, the questions on, now I'm definitely getting older because I got in the beginning because I wanted to ask you questions on the earlier slides, and yes, now I remember what it was. How much of you talk about the regulation and how much of it's coming from storage? Do you have any idea how much of it is it almost all coming from central station storage, or do you know if is co-located storage also a significant portion of the ancillary services that are coming from storage?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good question. And I think when I initially started this presentation, I was referring to that all the data in this chart goes back to the historical or the old storage model where the storage was just by itself. We haven't added all the other flags of co-located and hybrid resources. That's something which is on our radar for the upcoming MPPF. I can just let you know that we haven't seen a significant increase in co-located and hybrid participation yet, but we are now seeing all of those resources maybe coming online together, and maybe we see a lot of them, start actively participating in June and July. But so far, the trends that you see here are only from the central storage.
That's great to know. Just as a data point for you, back when, I was joking when there was only 100 megawatts of storage on the system, a lot of that was co-located. So it's started off co-located, then you got a huge slug of central station. So I used to be the, co-located or now called hybrid. Used to be the dog. Now it's the flea on the tail of the dog. But thank you very much. Appreciate knowing that there might be some metrics being reported on the difference between how, like, for instance, one question that when you're thinking about it be of interest is, are the hybrid resources only providing more, energy for, whether or not the co-located or hybrid are staying out of the regulation market or participating in the regulation market, versus other ways of participating in the market. So not just looking at, where the supplies are coming from, but how the two different types of resources, if there's a difference in how they participate. But thank you. This is really great and really interesting information. I appreciate you sharing this.
Thank you.
Okay, we do have quite a bit more information to get through today, so we're going to keep it moving. So let's go to the resource efficiency test section.
Thank you, Isabella. I think that may be my last section, so I'll go through those slides and then hand it over. So as Guillermo mentioned beginning of this presentation, we have started adding more information about the energy imbalance market. This specific topic is being central part of discussion for the most recent EIM meetings because there was a lot of discussion about how to improve the bid range capacity test. And during the discussions with stakeholders on the bid range capacity test, ISO had mentioned that there were two software issues that were identified as part of our bid range capacity test improvements, and those software fix was deployed in February of 2021. And for everyone, just a very high-level background about EIM and the resource sufficiency evaluation. For each trading hour, the California ISO performed tests for all the EIM entities that are participating in the market, and those tests are broadly the balancing test, the bid range capacity test, the flex ramp sufficiency test, and the feasibility test. Of these four tests, the two tests that have most talked about is the bid range capacity test and the flex ramp sufficiency test, because both these tests affect the ability of the EIM entity to have import or export economic transfers. And if an EIM entity fails either the bid range capacity test or the flex ramp sufficiency test, then the transfers in those specific directions are limited. And these tests are performed for all the EIM entities, including the California ISO. So with that, let me provide a brief description of this specific chart. So what this specific chart is showing us is the frequency or the passing rate of the bid range up capacity test for all the EIM entities that have been part of the ISO market from July 2020 through May 21. And as you can see, and what we really expect is for, let's say, 99% of time, all the EIM entities would essentially submit enough bids in the market that would cover any potential imbalances. So as you can see, most EIM entities have the bid range up capacity passing rate at or above 99%. There is one or two significant exceptions on this chart. You can see that one specific entity, SRP, has a very high bid range up capacity test failure in February. And as you may recall, in February, we had a very high gas price event. During that event, some of the entities were managing their gas consumption outside of the EIM, and thus not submitting bids in the market. That was the primary reason that you can see a very high bid range of capacity test failure in February. But apart from that, you will see that most entities are passing in most hours. Second trend of note is you will see EIM entities have a slightly higher failure rate for the bid range of capacity test after February, because prior to February 2021, when we were calculating the available upward bid range from generators, the market was not considering any Pmax D rates. And once that software issue was resolved, you see that previously there was some false capacity that was being made available to all the EIM entities, which are no longer the case, and that's why you have a slight uptick in the bid range of capacity test failure. Can we go to the next slide? So similar to the previous slide where we have the up capacity test results, this is the down capacity test result. And the down capacity test result, if an EIM entity fails, that has an implication of limiting their export transfers. And as expected before, we expect that most of the EIM entities have enough downward bid range in their system. And that's more, the downward test becomes more critical during the time when there is excess supply and with a lot of solar production in the afternoon hours. Those are some of the hours we expect maybe VAs have issues passing the down test, but now more and more solar resources are providing downward capacity, and they can respond to market signals. So that's why we really don't see any balancing area having issues passing the down test. And the worst frequency is around 0.3%, which is very, very small. Let me go on to the next two slides. Isabel, can we go to the next slide? So moving on from the bid range capacity test to the flex ramp sufficiency test, I think the flex ramp sufficiency test is something we have talked about in many of the prior MPPF and the policy discussion of late. The flex ramp sufficiency test, we haven't seen any changes or discussion about those. The historical rate, passing rate for most of the EIM entities is around 2%. There are maybe you can see 2 or 3 balancing areas that tend to have a slightly higher failure percentage for the up test. And as I mentioned before, in February, we had a time frame where there was a high gas price event, and there was limited ramp capacity available for some VAs that were managing their bid range or the gas consumption out of the market. So that's why you will see in February, specifically SRP has a high flex ramp sufficiency test failure. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, I believe this is the last slide on the EIM. And just one point I would like to make here is we have a slightly higher flex ramp down test failure rate for some balancing areas, and we can see maybe APS and Nevada, they have a failure rate of more than 2%. But apart from that, most other balancing areas, including the ISO, have been passing their flex ramp down sufficiency test, and majority of that is driven by the solar resources having ability, and even wind resources having ability to curtail. That's what is ensuring that most areas pass the down test. Only a handful of VAs have a failure rate of more than 2%. That's all I have for the EIM sufficiency results. Any questions on those?
Again, pressing pound 2 will enter you into the queue. In the interest of time, I just ask that you please keep your questions succinct so we can keep moving through the material.
We do have one caller in queue.
Thank you.
Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Chris Devon with Customized Energy Solutions. Can you hear me?
Hi, Chris.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hey, Rahul. Just real quick, going back to the batteries questions on the load forecasting piece of it. When you're taking out that load forecasting, I was just curious if you had any opinion about the impact of that longer term on kind of the planning horizon stuff, and if that needs to be included in the kind of RA requirements. And I know that there's going to be some discussion of that at the CPUC potentially, but I just think that there's a bit of a disconnect that just needs to be considered there if we're going to take that out of the kind of short-term forecasting. So just any thoughts you might have on that. I was just curious, if you have any initial reaction to that. And if Amber's still not on, yeah, I can just shoot an email to her and ask her offline or something like that too.
Yeah, I think that would be best to have a more broader discussion regarding that topic.
Okay, I'll take that offline. The other question I have real quickly is just the number of battery resources you have on that slide on 44 is 2,000 megawatts, and then you showed 3,500 megawatt hours of charging, stated charge maximum potential. I would just be curious in the future if you guys could just provide a little more granular data about like maybe the types of batteries that are on the system, co-located, hybridized, what ones are 1 hour duration, 2 hour duration, 4 hour duration, those sort of things, because it's kind of hard to tell how many resources really actually are able to rely on and how long when we just have aggregate numbers of 2,000 megawatts and 3,500 megawatts of state of charge, because megawatt hours of state of charge, because then it appears that there's about 875 megawatts of 4 hour duration batteries. So, rather than saying there's 2,000 megawatts, I think for kind of like RA purposes, it seems more like closer to 800 or 900 or something like that. So anyhow, maybe just in the future, some additional data points on that might be helpful, because it's hard. There's not really very much publicly available on Oasis or anything like that. So just a suggestion. You don't need to react to it at this point, but those are my pieces, and I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Point well taken, and we'll keep that in mind.
We have no more questions in the queue at this time.
Okay. I think that's all what I wanted to cover specific on this topic. All the other charts that we have here is to keep, provide consistent information month over month. We do not want to go through all of these slides, and I would like to see if there are any questions on any of the charts going all the way to page from slide 51 to 69. I would like to just see if there are any questions. Otherwise, I will hand it to Amber, Amir, if they are going to cover the forecast piece.
Do we have any questions in the queue?
We have no questions in the queue at this time.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you.
Yeah, and same thing for us in short-term forecasting. Everything's out there. If you guys have questions or anything particular about them, I'm happy to answer them. But at this time, I feel like we do not need to go through any of the slide deck, and there's no item that's particularly outstanding at the moment that we would like to address.
Any questions?
We have no questions in the queue at this time. As a reminder, once again, dialing #2 will place you in the question queue.
Okay. Any questions come in? I'll check one last time before we move on.
No more questions at this time.
Okay. Thanks. So now we will move into an update on the stakeholder process improvements, and I will hand it over to Keone.
Good morning, everybody. This is Keone Almeida, Manager of Stakeholder Affairs. And I'll just be providing a brief overview of changes that we will be implementing in the stakeholder process. These changes are made based off of input we've received from stakeholders. First off, I do want to take this opportunity to thank all of the stakeholders that participate in our stakeholder processes. We recognize it's a commitment of resources to review papers, participate in meetings, and submitting comments. So thank you for all your work with that. The stakeholder input is vital to the success of the development and implementation of new market design policies and infrastructure planning. In order to enable valuable feedback through the proposals, meetings, and comments that help to shape the outcome of the policy, the ISO continually strives to improve its stakeholder process to ensure robust and broad stakeholder engagement. So during the policy initiatives development, there are typically 4 proposal iterations. We have the issue paper, the straw proposals, the draft final proposal, and the final proposals. The ISO uses a consistent process for obtaining stakeholder input. Excuse me. For obtaining stakeholder input on policy initiatives at each iteration. However, we do recognize that in some cases where the initiative is highly complex or controversial, adding a stakeholder engagement is warranted. So on this slide that Isabel is showing here, we're proposing stakeholder process improvements, and we're doing this in an effort to foster additional collaboration in our stakeholder processes. The ISO will add to the process the option of conducting a workshop prior to the publication of the issue paper for initiatives that would benefit from upfront stakeholder input on the scope of the issues to be addressed in the initiatives. In addition, the ISO may hold a workshop to gather stakeholder perspectives on the proposal scope, the design principles, and preferred design to resolve the identified issues before developing and publishing the ISO straw proposal. This approach for additional workshops may not be needed for every initiative, but for those initiatives that have a certain level of complexity, this will provide the opportunity for additional stakeholder input early in the process, which should lead to more alignment of the proposal design when the initial straw proposal is published. So that's basically an overview of the improvements that we're going to be implementing. Are there any questions? This graphic kind of shows which is on our stakeholder initiative webpage. We just updated it to include the issue paper and the working groups combined there in the beginning with some other minor changes. So any questions?
Again, pressing #2 will enter you into the question queue.
We do have one caller.
Okay, go ahead.
Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Keone. This is Chun-Yi Lo from PG&E. Thank you for presenting the proposed improvements. So from implementation standpoint, I know, is this the end of the slide for the proposed improvement, or is that more will be focused on the implementation end of the things?
Yeah, this is the last slide specific to the stakeholder process in the policy development aspect of it. In terms of implementation, I don't have any in terms of implementation improvements. I know they're continually working from the PMO office, continually working to improve that, but I don't have any information on that.
All right. Thank you. And what suggestion will be the design and during the implementation, the design and the build process. I think CAISO has done for some, it will be very good for consistency that having a CPG, having a call, and kind of review the blueprint, and then also getting stakeholders' perspective and into the design process. I think that will be also very helpful.
Yes, I should add that in this graphic, we are trying to move that, like the business requirement specifications, the draft of those, we're moving those up further before the final is written, along with the BPMs, the drafts of the BPM. So we are trying to get those out further in advance than what we have done in the past. So yes, I appreciate your input on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any
other questions?
We have no further questions in the queue at this time.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody.
All right. Thanks, Keone. Okay, so in the interest of time, we are going to go straight to the release planning update. We did have a stakeholder call last Thursday where we discussed the changes to the roadmap. And so a lot of the information in this policy update was just recently discussed. But if you do have any questions on any of these slides, please just send an email to ISO@stakeholderaffairs@CAISO.com, and we'll direct it to the appropriate me to get you an answer. So with that, I'm going to move into the release planning update, and I'll hand it over to Adrian Chiosi.
All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Adrian Chiosi. I'm a manager in the PMO office, and I have some updates for you. All those updates that we have on the release plans are similar to what you heard last week on the release user group meeting, and the current event activities are also discussed in the two market simulation calls we have Mondays and Thursdays. Anyway, we have some announcements for you, so I think this would be of use and valuable to you. Let's get going. First, we have the slides related to the training classes, and usually Cindy Hinman or Radha Madrigal are presenting those updates. Not much has changed from last week, so this slide and next slide are for your reference in case you're interested in a training program, but I'm not going to get into a lot of details on it. So let's move on to the next slide, Isabella. One more. Next, Isabella. This is also training. Okay. On this slide 99, we have our release plans for 2021. And as you see, we have the summer projects, the independent projects, and the fall release projects. Again, there are no significant changes compared to what you've seen last week, only some check marks, because last week, in the day we had the RUG, that evening, Northwestern Energy went live on energy imbalance market. So we have check marks for those, and probably today will be the last time we report on those projects. So let's move to the next slide. For the spring of 2022, I think the only change we have here is that we used to report on 5 entities, including PSCO, Xcel Energy, and at this point they put a hold there, just evaluating some changes on their side, and I think their implementation is postponed by 1 year. So they will show up probably in the 2023 cycle, but for now we only have 4 EIM entities joining the energy imbalance market in 2022. For the spring of 2022, also, let me step back. Usually, spring release is dedicated to EIM and EIM integrations, but since we have many large projects in 2021, we decided to postpone some of them in 2022, and we want to complete them as soon as possible. And they are FRP, flexible ramping product deliverability, that it's coming in 2022. We have the EIM-based schedule submission deadline, phase 2, also known as T-40 to T-30, which has related, a dependency on the FRP. So that one has also to come on the spring of 2022. And I'll talk about it, about a phase of the hybrid resources. I think this is the first time you're hearing this announcement that given the amount of work involved in this project, we plan to deliver partially hybrid resources phase 2 with a phase in 2021 and the rest of it in the spring of 2022. And for reference, also, since we got several inquiries from market participants about what's on our plan for the fall of 2022, those are the projects that are on our horizon, things that are coming on the policy track, and, other projects of priority to us. And obviously this list is subject to pending policy and our planning activities. This is my high-level update to you, and then we'll go into some details and announcement, as I said, when we go, in the individual updates. I'll stop here for any questions.
Again, pressing #2 will enter you into the question queue.
We have no questions in the queue at this time.
Great. We have plenty of time to address any questions later. Okay, let's get moving. Okay, summer readiness. This is the dashboard that Frank has presented for the last release user group, Frank Grove, our release lead. And again, I don't have that many changes. All of those updates are discussed in the market simulation call Mondays and Thursdays. So in blue are the parts that are already done, and in black are still items outstanding. As you can see from this one for K31, it was activated on June 13, and we discussed that at the last slug. So probably this is the last time you will see reference to this project. On the summer readiness, we have phase 1, phase 2, it's completing on, and phase 3 actually. This is a typo that I have here. It looks like I haven't caught it on my revision of this deck. Phase 2, it's also 615 for summer readiness. All of it was implemented on 615, which is done. So on the last column, the third section down saying phase 3, 630.21 should read 615.21 because that was implemented. What's left is this phase 3, the market simulation. It's ongoing, and we plan to finish by this week. I think all the market simulation structure scenarios are completed successfully. We're just executing selected scenarios per market participants' request. And we plan to implement this by 6:30. All right. There are some non-policy items that will go to 7:30 at this point. That we will have some items in the market simulation calls and release user group next week that we can discuss. Summer readiness to the export billing and load scheduling priorities. That one, it's anticipated to be implemented by 7:15. market simulation starting on 6:30 through 7:06 with a 1-week buffer towards that 7:15 go live. The resource adequacy, we plan to complete the resource adequacy by 6:30, and we have some OMS components that the market simulation for that OMS components will start on 6:28 with an implementation target date of 7:12. So that's the summary. Let's move to the next slide. I think we'll have some more details, which will this is the details that spells the functionality that will implement it with Resource Adequacy Phase 2 and Summer Readiness Phase 3. This is just for your reference. I think this is known information. For now, let's move on to next slide. Integration services, right, for Summer Readiness, RA enhancements, and we have a couple of other, items on this list, including the independent for OSI 2021. So as I said earlier, for K31 it should be taken off because everything is done. I think what's outstanding on this list for Summer Readiness are some cyber integration that we plan to post by 6:28. They will go live by 7:15. Those are, not sure if we kept that STOG meeting today, but those would have been discussed at the STOG meeting, and we also have a ROC next week. Frank will be back for that meeting, and she can provide more details. She's our expert on those integrations. Okay, let's move on. Summer Readiness, this is the scope that has been presented to you for some time now. Let's move on to the next one. Okay. So, okay, we have some check marks, external training. Yeah, I think that's of interest to you. That's external training that will happen on June 24th, which is in a couple of days. So that might be kind of heads up, this is coming. I'm sure, those interested know about it. And at this point, we plan to wrap up this by June 30th. As you see, we have the export load and bidding on July 15 and some non-policy related items by July 30th. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, I think she's trying to provide some specific items here that we're discussing at the market simulation and the release user group regarding readiness for this. I think those dates have not changed or shouldn't be news to you. Let's move on to the next slide. Resource adequacy. For resource adequacy, as I said, we have the, some items that will be completed by the 30th. We're still executing some scenarios or some selected scenarios, unstructured market simulation with market participants by the end of this week and probably next week too, leading to the June 30th activation. And we have some OMS changes that we plan to start the simulation on June 28th and deploy them in production by July 12th. Okay. Yeah, this is a demand response update that we have been presenting for quite some time. I think at this point, most of those are completed, so I'll ask trying to remove this from the presentation in the future. Let's move on to the next slide. Oh, we're getting to independence. So now, since we're getting to a new section, if you have any questions related to the summer, section, maybe I can help with some answers or take some some action items to provide answers to you.
So while we're waiting for folks to enter the question queue, I am seeing one in the chat. So for the summer 2021 release, did FERC rule on the export wheeling and load scheduling priorities, and if approved, will that go into effect July 6th?
For that, so export wheeling, that's scheduled for 7/15, and we filed the tariff on 4/28. I'm not aware of a FERC decision for this one. I don't think we have received a FERC approval yet, but usually FERC takes about 60 days. So we should be getting news from FERC very soon. If not this week, probably early next week. We'll keep you informed. Again, we have a RUG next week, and we have market simulation. So as soon as that decision comes in, we'll let you know.
Thanks, Adrian. Do we have any questions over the phone? Again, pressing #2 will enter you into the queue.
There are currently no questions in the queue.
Okay, let's move to the independent. I think, we have some interfaces for those independent projects. Of interest is this Sodero O&M project that we plan to complete by the end of the year. I think we're trying, the mandate we have is to start, and it has to start at the beginning of the year, of the 2022. Our deployment, we plan to finish this project earlier, and you have heard probably last in the RUG meeting from Kevin on interactions with you to help negotiate some of the exercises leading up to our deployment activation of this project. So we'll probably continue to invite Kevin to maintain that conversation on the project, and so that you're aware of all the functionality coming into our markets. For now, we're aiming this project to be completed by beginning of October, but the project will only be activated by January 1st of 2022. Let's move on. All right, the RTCD and AS test. This is the functionality that was a leftover from our ADS implementation project. And the RTCD was activated on Monday 24th, and probably we should take that from the title of this, and because we only have the AS test functionality that needs to be confirmed as working and deploying the production. And those conversations take place in the market sim and the RUG. I think we don't have a clear date because it involves some conversation we have with our vendor for the ancillary services test. So as soon as we get more certainty on the delivery and functionality testing for that functionality, we'll let you know. We'll keep you informed in the market simulation and RUG calls. Move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, EIM enhancements phase 2. This is, and you will see in the next slides, the scope of this project. Oh, actually, we have a high-level scope here. Usually, our energy imbalance market participants are identifying high-priority enhancements for the energy imbalance markets. We create a project in the year, and we are addressing those as soon as we find opportunities to deploy those in productions. And so we're updating market participants in anticipation of those promotions. At this point, the project has delivered some enhancements, I guess, for that were necessary for the Northwest Energy by June 15. And I think we have throughout the year, some implementation, or staggered implementation of those enhancements. And that's why it's not part of the release, it's part of independent deployments, just because we will have multiple production deployment states. And we'll keep you informed as soon as those dates are firming up. I don't think we have firm dates right now for this project. So let's move on. Yeah, it's part of the same update. Let me see. Let's skip to the next few slides. One more, please, Isabella. This is the scope, detailed scope. This slide here is EIM Enhancements Phase 2, and this is, I think we're aiming, as I said, this is an independent project, and we plan to complete all those enhancements this year. We plan to be done with those enhancements by December 1st. That's our target. VOM, I think we already discussed this. I discussed that in that summary page. Again, we'll continue to, as you can see, not the last paragraph, the one above in the suggested actions. I think that's why Kevin came up in the release user group in last week to encourage you to participate on those conversations for for the O&M adders and be engaged and involved on those changes as they happen throughout the year. So as I said, we'll continue to invite Kevin and have him converse with you during those events, release user group. Let's move on. Okay, one more, please. Okay, the project looks like we have a negotiation deadline by June 18. If some of you missed that, again, probably will have Kevin answer to see if he has any backup options for you to have those conversations, those negotiations. External training now, it's scheduled for October 14. We're trying to implement those as close as possible for you before this one becomes active. Maybe we'll continue to discuss this if October 14 is the best time to have the training, or you want to have one on October 14 and a repeat close to January 1st when this one goes live. But for now, this is our plan for the VOM. Okay, let's move on. I think we can, operation system improvements. Okay, so, each year California ISO gets a request from our operators to provide system enhancements that helps them better manage the grid or events in the grid. So sometimes, most of those enhancements are completely dedicated to our operators, grid operators, but some of them may have external impacts. So that's why we added this slide to communicate to you any enhancements requested in this year that could impact market participants. So I think we have identified a list of enhancements, and as we make progress in the development of those enhancements and the system that have external exposure to market participants, then we'll inform you of the impact those will have to you and the implementation schedule for those enhancements. I think if you go to the next slide, this is the list of systems and enhancements we plan to do. So you can see impacts on ADS, CIRA, DRS, EMS, EMMS, market, MRI, waste on OMS. All of those systems have somewhat exposure externally, and those enhancements could be of significance and use to you. So again, as soon as we firm up the dates for the timelines of each one of those systems, implementation and production, we'll communicate them as soon as possible to you. I think that was the last slide I had for independent projects. Maybe this is a good time to stop and see if there are any questions.
Again, pressing pound 2 will enter you into the question queue.
We do have a caller on the line.
Okay, go ahead.
Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Adrian. Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions. Going back to page 102, sorry to take you back, but I was waiting to see if this got covered in the BPM meeting that's going on right now as well, and I don't think that it was. So I just have a couple quick questions for you. So
okay,
on
this line, 102? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, 102. So on PRR 1345, the changes in the penalty prices related to the export load and wheeling under the current tariff. I'm just curious, what is the current plan for production activation on those changes? I know it was done as an emergency PRR, and it looks like there were a number of comments that may be leading to a potential appeals process there. I don't know if there's been any discussion of that, but I'm just curious if right now the ISO is planning to go ahead with production activation on it since it was done as an emergency PRR.
Oh, I see. And this is so. Dan, thank you for that. It's a good point. I'll tell you from our implementation perspective. As soon as we set up that, that target date, we are driving towards that. That's what it's our mandate from the implementation standpoint. But we are subject to those constraints, as you said, from if, FERC doesn't approve it or, we have comments that are significant in our legal, our policy puts a stop to it. Obviously, we're subject to those, to those constraints. So if we get any development where, our legal or, FERC tells us that this needs to stop or be postponed for, definite reasons, we'll just observe those, those instructions. For now, our plan is to, to deliver on that date, and I think we're trying, we are executing the project and trying to check all the boxes regarding the implementation and testing and all the quality review criteria that we are subject to feel comfortable about the quality of the implementation that we have. But a more direct answer to you, I'm not aware of that date being in as a question mark. For us, that's our mandate, and that's what we're driving to.
And sorry, was that date June 30th, or was that the July 30th? I just wasn't mapping between what was on the page there.
You're talking about the summer, the export wheeling and load scheduling priorities, right?
No, just PRR 1345, which is export load and wheeling, but not the official summer readiness one that's pending the FERC tariff, just the PRR 1345.
45. Okay. Penalty prices.
Yeah, in the BPM slide, it still, and on the BPM side, it still says pending, I think, what it was, pending recommendation. But since you had it on this slide, I didn't know if there was a production activation date set for that PRR that we needed to be aware of.
Yeah. Then I'll be honest with you, I don't have the answer to this one. I need to follow up with, with our project manager. I don't think we have him here. So at this point, what I can, if you could make, please, this market simulation on Thursday, I'll invite them there and provide that clarification. I think that's where I can definitely answer that. I can maybe speculate a little bit here, but I don't want to do that. So I can provide you that answer on Thursday when we have the market simulation call.
Sure. I'll send you over an email as well. I thought that I had missed it and that you'd covered it earlier, so but we can leave it there. Thanks.
Yeah. No, this is important. Thank you for that.
There are currently no more questions in the queue. As a reminder, dialing #2, place you in the question queue.
Right.
Thanks, Robbie.
That to the full release. All right. Okay, that's a big announcement that we have for you today, a significant one. So at this point, given the amount of work that we see and a lot of effort and a lot of attention and things, plus some, input we have received from specific market participants, we are recommending that we move the implementation date for the full release from October 1st to November 1st. Again, this is our recommendations, and it's pending your feedback. Right? You can comment today, or you can provide more. You can think about it and let us know by the next ROC next week. But that's given the the effort and work we see ahead of us, and the feedback we have received from market participants on that timeline. This is our recommendation that we postpone or target the full release implementation by November 1st. And if that's the case, I think our market simulation slides, we're still going to be observing a 1-month buffer between the end of the market simulation and production activation. So we plan to have the market simulation finished by October 1st. We plan to start the market simulation then by August 30th, which gives us like a 5-week, window for market simulation, and probably we'll use the first week for connectivity testing. We'll have a 4 full week for structured and unstructured market simulation. Training then is going to be, due closer to start of the market simulation scenario execution. So that will be, the kind of the top-down planning will be to complete training by 9/10. What else? I think the market simulation scenarios on this one, when it comes to technical specification, configuration guides, and the VRS, I think we're pretty much done with that. And I think an update for you is that for the hybrid resources, we will have a revised VRS by 6/28. And we also posted, I think we got a comment last time from Chunu on the short-long star definition. So we posted a VRS for that project earlier looks like yesterday, sorry. And then I'm hearing from Anshuman, our lead market simulation coordinator, that he plans to post the market simulation scenario for EDSA 4 by 6/24. So we're making progress. We're making good progress in terms of the deliverable that you need in preparation for the full release. You have a lot of technical specification, VRSs, market simulations are coming. You have draft errors, I guess, for some of those projects. So you have a lot of information to work towards this full release package. But again, I think our proposal at this point, recommendation, is to move the target date for November 1st. Okay, let's continue the presentation, and as soon as you have any questions, I'll give you a chance to, ask those. On the integration interface changes, most of those information are for your reference. I think those are being discussed at the TUG, and also try and present them at the ROG. There are no changes to the current content of those integrations. Let's move on to the next one. ESDR Phase 4, it's our first project. The project is doing well. Just want to inform you of that. I think we're making good progress towards, the development, code development, and probably we'll get into some testing phase with some of those systems soon. So project is going well. Again, now with your pending your feedback and okay, then we can probably target this project moving to the November 1st implementation date. Let's skip the next slide because it's part of the scope, and market participants already have the information in the BRS that hasn't changed. In terms of the milestone, now the BPM updates are due by August 28th, external training by August 31st, market simulation August 30th through October 1st, and ESA for activation on November 1st. Again, this is assuming that we'll agree on the new timeline, and this is what the project timeline will look like in that scenario. Okay, hybrid. I think on this hybrid, I may have mentioned, but I haven't gone into a lot of details in my summary slide. Again, both ESDR and hybrid are large projects, large policy initiative. Hybrid Q is in particular challenging for the amount of work and development needed from our vendors. And given that amount of work, we made a decision to split the project into two phases, and 2A and 2B. And 2A, we're aiming to, this is implementing ancillary services and high sustainable limit functionality with focus on EMS, IFM, RTM, all settlements, and TMRI systems. And we plan to deliver this with the full release package. The 2B, the remainder of the project, it's now planned in the spring of 2022. And as you can see, we have also a note saying that external BRS 1.4 is targeted to be posted the week of June 28th, and that BRS will identify which BRQs, which specific functionality will be part of this phase 2A this year, and which will be part of the phase 2B next year. That way we have clarity and understanding on what we're going to be driving for this year. So that's the second major announcement I had for today, to inform you and seek your feedback given this revised plans for implementation. Okay, since this was a major announcement, maybe I can stop here just in case there are any questions. Those are large projects in the fall of 2021.
We do have a couple. Yeah, we do have a couple callers on queue. First caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Agent. This is Chen Yu from PG&E. Can you go back to a couple slides? The overview of the full release timeline?
Yep.
Yeah, over here. So I do want to point out the market sim. I'm sure that's what you mean, from August 30th to October 1st. Is that correct? Not September 1st.
Oh, you're right. I'm very sorry.
No.
Like it's a typo. Yes, October 1st.
Yeah.
Obviously, we can't execute this on one day, right?
Right. So I do want to talk about the timeline here. Because typically for the large project, we do have 6 weeks of testing timeline. 2 weeks being connectivity, which is we basically don't have, the functionality is not there to test. It's just that the chance for us to test whether we can connect to the system. So this is 4 weeks of testing, or maybe 4 weeks in a few days. And I wonder if CAISO can consider expand the testing timeline from 4 weeks to 6 weeks, just to honor the time that we normally will need for testing for something like ESSA Phase 4 and the hybrid resource. Some of the big projects, definitely we will need 2 weeks of testing for the functionality.
Yeah, I understand, Chinyu, and what you say makes sense. I think you're right. I think those dates or also, coordinated with, the feasibility of the code delivery and testing on our site. So I don't think we can start the market simulation earlier than 8:30, given what we see in terms of our vendor delivery. So that's a little bit kind of a firm target. But definitely on the other side, on, October 1st, right, we put that date because we want to give you like a month buffer between the, as I said, end of market simulation and the production activation of November 1st. But we will always expand, the window to allow for any unstructured. I mean, this is the formal market simulation window when we plan to complete all the structure scenarios. But beyond that, the map stage environment will be open to you with full functionality that you can test, probably close to November 1st. So if that was your question, yeah, that window, automatically expands per the needs of market participants.
Okay, that makes sense. I just want to emphasize, typically, the month from the time that market sim conclude to production activation, usually a month, that is the time to allow we market participants to review the settlement statements, because typically the settlement statements coming out T+6B, which is about 10 days, and we won't even get a chance to review that during the market sim timeline. So that month basically is a buffer for review the settlement and resolve any issues that we detect during the market sim. So just kind of want to make it clear that that month, actually, we make a very good use of it normally. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I get it. And point taken. I think at this point, we have to continue to discuss the details of this. As I said, I think our target to start this market sim, given the deliveries we see on the code and the time we need to test and end-to-end test the cases, would be to start by August 30th. And pending the successful execution of market simulation scenarios, we want to finish all of those by October 1st, 10/1. And then pending that, they get, settlement results, and then we can discuss that, and we can iterate on some of that in that buffer time. But as we are moving on and see the complexity and the needs you have on the simulation, then we can review the options and the need that we all will have on this one. Again, probably posting the market simulation scenario in 624 will help us start a conversation on the amount of testing and the complexity of the testing that needs to happen for this SDF4, which is a large project. Thank you for that comment, Janine. I think there is a second question.
Yes. Moving on to the next caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Adrian. This is Alva Bijani. On the hybrid, the new split between phase 2A and 2B, my understanding from the way you've described it would be that, to me, one of the biggest parts of the hybrid phase 2 was the dynamic dispatch tool. And I'm assuming you're just putting that under cyber now in phase 2B. I think it should be called out because it's a major change in process, but I just wanted to confirm that's in the scope of phase 2B.
I think what you're saying, spell it out because that's very important. Yeah, I'll think we do that. Probably. I think we focused on spelling out what we can deliver this year, but we have to be clear on what's left out, right? And I think we were trying to be very thoughtful about this because we saw the constraints we have, and I think we want to deliver some value to you, something that you can use as soon as possible. And we given what we saw there, we said probably what we can deliver in this timeline is the ancillary services and high sustainable limit, but the rest is next year. So I'll make sure that we spell this dynamic functionality as a component that will be delivered in the phase 2 in the spring of 2022.
Thanks very much, Adrian.
Thank you.
We have no more callers in the queue at this time.
Okay, so let's see, Hybrid 2. Okay, this is the timeline for Hybrid 2, and again, we put in blue that the new, targets to post a revised BRS version 1.4 that delineates the scope for 2A and 2B. I think we posted the input specifications. Tariff looks like we're aiming no later than August 1st. BPMs in August, external training in September, and then the market simulation window and the deployment date are release constraints. Again, we can discuss specifically those projects in the release user group and decide if we need to customize anything in terms of the dates or timelines. We want to keep those together as a package going on the release deployments. Okay, so on the base schedule submission deadline, I think this project actually was ready earlier this year. I think given the comments we have received from FERC, I think we delayed the implementation of this project for later this year. That's phase 1 we're talking about. Phase 2, that's T-4, T-30, that's planned for the spring of 2022 together with FRP. But this phase 1, we already had the market simulation in April, so everything is looking good. I think we postponed this because of the first comments and notes. We are bound to refile this, and from our legal, we were advised that our filing with FERC was going to happen in July. And with that, we'll probably get an answer from FERC on confirmation of our changes in time for the November 1st implementation date. So that's the plans for this base schedule submission deadline, phase 1. Okay. Probably we can move to the next slide. I already discussed those timelines. Real-time settlement phase 2. This is also a project that is in an advanced state. I think we're doing very well in terms of those. The conversations are also ongoing with market participants in the settlements regular meetings that we have. So the project it's well timed for the fall release. I think this is one of the easier components of the fall release. Let's move on to the next project. Intertie shadow pricing. Yeah, I think we can. Those are the first slides on each project are for the major impacts that project has. But since you already have a external BRS, that's much more detailed and informative to you. So please reference that BRS when looking for this project. For this intertie shadow pricing, we have no tariff, no BPMs affected. It looks like we plan external training. We plan to implement the project by November 1st. We can discuss it in the ROG meetings, and as soon as we get closer to the projects, then we may take any actions you have on our side. Short, long start definitions, also a small project, given the amount of work for this. So let's move to the, as I said, this was useful last time when we presented, but since we posted BRS, please reference that BRS because that will have more details than what you see here. So again, you will see that BRS that was posted yesterday in our release page, public page, california.caiso.com under the release updates. On the next slide, please. Yeah. We're indicating the second line there, that posting of the BRS. the rest of the timeline here indicates the project will follow the fall release timeline. And I think we also have an extra slide for this short, long star definition that it looks like we have a PR forthcoming. So it looks like in the prior slide we said we have no BPMs. Let me see. No, we indicated the BPMs. I'm sorry. The BPMs for the short, long star definition are due by August 20th. So looks like we have some additional details that are related to this project. I think we had this slide in the prior ROG, and I don't think I have any updates on it. Any questions? I thought I saw something coming on the chat part.
Do we have any questions in the queue?
We have no questions in the queue at this time.
Okay.
Okay, looks like we have someone specified on our side kind of making it aware that the training has been moved to 9/6. So we'll update the slide for short long star definition to reflect the training target date of 9/6. Thank you for that, Heidi. Right, spring release. On the spring release, moving our normal spring release is that, as I said earlier, is dedicated for the EIM integrations. At this point, we have, I should have changed, the title of this. I thought I did, but we still have Excel Energy Colorado in the title. That should be taken out because at this point we only have Avista, BPA, Tacoma, and Tucson coming in 2022. Market simulation for some of those entities, Avista, BPA, and Tacoma starts in October, and Tucson will start the market simulation in December. Then all of them will start the parallel operations in February and through end of March. And we plan to activate, BPA, Avista, and Tacoma by beginning of March 2nd, while Tucson will go live on 4/1. So that's the plan for the EIM integrations next year. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to the FRP and the related projects in the spring, which are aiming for a May 1st implementation date, just to avoid conflict with EIM integrations. But we plan to deliver those projects as soon as possible. That's our target, our plan so far. So I'm not going to, say much about this. This was a project that was planned for the fall. It was moved to the spring of 2021. So again, the new target date for the project is May 1st, and you'll see a lot of TBDs pending further planning of what we have on our side. Thank you for moving to this next slide. I think the next slide we have is on the EIM-based schedule submission deadline phase 2. This is also known as the T-40, T-30 enhancement. And this is mainly a performance enhancements where, we're aiming to implement for our markets, but it also has a dependency on the FRP project. So this has, those two projects will follow together as we make, as we complete the development and testing. And I think next time what you'll see in this batch, you will see our hybrid resources phase 2B, because we'll split the specification of the requirements, and Alba I'll make sure that our business analyst acknowledges the full scope and components that will go in the spring of 2022. I think that might be the last slide we have on our deck. Those are our release plans, and again, the major announcements were their recommendation to move the fall release to November 1st and the split of Hybrid 2 into two major phases, one for 2021, fall 2021, and one for the spring of 2022. Again, we expect some acknowledgments and some, agreements or disagreements from you by the next RUG on those plans, and then that way we can firm up our fall release timeline. Any final questions for me?
Do we have any questions in the queue?
There are no questions in the queue at this time.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming to our update today. Wishing you a great day and a great rest of the week.
All right. Thanks, Adrian. So just quickly to wrap up, we have a few slides here on ways to stay informed and participate in releases. Our release planning information is stored on the release planning webpage on the California ISO, linked here on this slide. The release user groups are held biweekly and provide initiative status updates as well as any system change updates on independent releases. And then we also have market simulation calls. You can find those on the ISO calendar for meeting dates and times, but they're typically held on Mondays and Thursdays. And then, of course, the Market and Performance and Planning Forum, which I believe we have quarterly right now, for review of market performance issues and discussion of release planning, implementation, and new market enhancements. Here's just a screenshot of the calendar and what to look for. So the upcoming MPPF is scheduled for September 9th, 2021, and all MPPF-related materials are available on the user groups and recurring meetings webpage on the California ISO website. If you do have any agenda topics or suggestions for future MPPFs, you can submit those through Citi. Just select the Market Performance and Planning Forum category, and you can also send an email to isostakeholderaffairs@CAISO.com. Thank you all for joining us today. That concludes today's MPPF, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.